It's the 4th of August 1972, and Idi Amin Dada is touring Tororo in eastern Uganda when he drops a bombshell that would echo through the corridors of years to come. He shares a dream that he had, a vision from the higher power, urging him to take a drastic action to protect the native Ugandans from what he saw as economic exploitation by foreigners. So in that moment, Idi Amin Dada declares war on Ugandan Asian communities, predominantly the Asians, who he accuses of milking the economy dry. He issues an ultimatum: 70,000 Asians have 90 days to renounce their British citizenship or face expulsion from the country.
Asians have kept themselves apart as a closed community and have refused to integrate with Ugandan Africans. Their main interest has been to exploit the economy of Uganda and Ugandan Africans. They have been milking the economy of the country.
These Asians weren't just bystanders. They controlled everything from the shops to schools, factories to plantations, essentially dominating the Uganda's commercial landscape. It's a move that would reverberate far beyond the borders of Uganda, sparking international outrage and forever altering the Uganda's social and economic fabric. Now overnight, thousands of families were torn apart, their livelihoods were shattered, and they were forced to abandon everything that they built and flee for their lives. But for Idi Amin Dada, it's a calculated power play, a way to consolidate his grip on Uganda and rally support among the native population. So the expulsion would go on to make a significant damage on both the Uganda's economy and international reputation. Many world leaders condemned the expulsion, and several nations, particularly the United Kingdom and India, would go on to cut diplomatic ties as a result. Now the economy suffered a significant drop in GDP, as many native Ugandans lacked the expertise necessary to operate the newly acquired businesses. So in this episode of Uganda in History, we cover the tragic story about the expulsion of the Ugandan Asians. It's a story that put Uganda on the map for the bad reasons. However, Idi Amin Dada, the dictator, wasn't moved at all. The presence of Asians in Uganda was a result of the deliberate choices by the British administration that ruled Uganda from 1894 to 1962. They were brought to the Ugandan Protectorate by the British to serve as a buffer between the Europeans and the Africans in the Madorag of commerce and administration. So in addition, in the 1890s, 32,000 laborers from British India were brought to Southeast Africa under the labor contracts to work on the construction of the Ugandan Railway. So most of the surviving Indians returned home, but 6,724 individuals decided to remain in the Africa's Great Lakes region. So after the line's completion, most of them went on to remain in Uganda. So at the time of the expulsion, there were approximately 80,000 individuals of South Asian descent in Uganda, of whom 23,000 had their application for citizenship both processed and accepted. So Idi Amin Dada would go on to argue that since all of them were British subjects at the same point, he was right to include even those who had taken out their Ugandan citizenship. So the net result was to create a category of persons who are neither British nor Ugandan, but stateless. Now you see, the British had invested in the education of the Asian minorities in preference to that of the indigenous Ugandans. So by early 1970, many Indians in the Southeast Africa and Uganda in particular were employed in the fashion and banking business, and Indophobia was already ingrained by the start of Idi Amin's rule by February 1971. Now, while not all the Ugandan Asians were well off, they were on average better off than the indigenous communities, constituting 1% of the population while earning a fifth of the national income. Indians were stereotyped as merely traders and labeled as dukawalas, who tried to cheat unsuspecting purchases and looked out only for their own families. Now, racial segregation would go on to be institutionalized. Now, Apollo Milton Obote's government had pursued a policy of Africanization, which included policies targeted at the Ugandan Indians. So by 1968, a committee was established on Africanization in commerce and industry. For example, he made far-reaching Indophobic proposals, and systematic work permits and trade licenses were introduced in 1969 to restrict the role of non-citizens, especially the Indians, in the economic and professional activities. Now, nonetheless, Amin's policies represented a significant acceleration. So in August 1971, Amin announced a review of the citizenship status awarded to the Ugandan Asian communities, followed by a declaration of a census of the Ugandan Asian population in October that year. So in order to resolve the misunderstanding regarding the role of the Ugandan Asian minority in society, he would go on to convene an Indian conference between 7th and 8th December of that year. So in a memorandum represented on the second day of the conference, he set out his hope that the wide gap between the Ugandan Indians and the Africans would go on to narrow. So on 4th August 1972, Idi Amin Dada declared that Britain would need to take responsibility for caring for the British subjects who were of Indian origin, accusing them of sabotaging the Ugandan economy and encouraging corruption. So the deadline for the British subjects to leave Uganda was confirmed as 3 months, which came to be 8th November 1972.
Before I hand over the government to another government, I must reorganize this country properly, and this is a part of my program to follow. I am the best friend of British, and your best friend is the friend who tells you your mistake. And that is why I said that the responsibility of Asians in Uganda, it is the responsibility of Great Britain.
Now on 9th August 1972, the policy was expanded to include citizens of India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. The position of the 23,000 Indians who had been granted Ugandan citizenship was less clear. Not originally included, but on 9th August they were seemingly added to the list before being re-exempted after 3 days following an international protest. Now many chose to leave rather than endure further intimidation, with only 4,000 known to have stayed behind. Now the exemption for certain professions were added and then later removed.
Less than 8 weeks are left before the deadline runs out. 8 weeks in which, according to General Amin, 65,000 Asians must leave Uganda. So far, only a handful have gone. The rest spend day after day waiting in queue after queue. They queue for tickets, they queue for permits, they queue at ministries, they queue at the bank, but still they can't get out. In Kampala, the Asians are dazed and frustrated. The new threat that if they fail to leave before the deadline, they'll be sent into concentration camps run by the army turns anxiety into fear. Are you worried? Some people seem worried here about the situation actually in Uganda.
Well, definitely. You see that at that moment, as you can see, every day you get a bloody new forms to fill it up. And every day new law, you know, and new rules. And you don't know what to do next. You go East African Airways, they give you a form to get a ticket. Then you fill that up, you go to Bank of Uganda, you go to other, you don't know what to do. Just run up and down, just looking for the forms, that's all.
How long do you think it'll be before you're able to get out?
Well, we don't know ourselves yet. We are still, as you can see, standing in a queue. When they're going to give us a form, we don't know. And after issuing these forms, what they're going to do also, we don't know.
Tell me, what do you think about the fact that the British Asians are leaving?
You know, actually, that's a bit of a difficult question for me. You mean my attitude about
your attitude.
going? Yeah. Anyway, it's good. It's good for them to go.
Why?
They have sacked us enough.
Will you be taking over their businesses?
Yes, according to the government's help.
What do you think about the Asians?
I want them to go.
You want them to go?
Oh, yes.
Why is that?
They kicked us. You know, from experience, we've discovered that Asians are very, very shrewd. And they've been exploiting this country for a very, very long time. So if the president gave them a very long time, they would have really succeeded in taking everything from this country.
I think President Amin is in the right direction.
But what about the queues of extremely worried and quite often frightened Asians saying, we don't know where we're going, we don't know what's going to happen to us, why can't we get out of the country, our papers are being held, that kind of thing. Doesn't that worry you at all?
But for people who have been living with Asians, we know how much they can panic, you know, when it's a minor thing. And that's why you expected this. In fact, they are doing it better. We expected much more confusion than there is today.
Why?
because they are known as the most panicky people in the world. If you've been living with these people, you would, just know that this is the right thing they're doing. There is no cause to worry at all.
Now, the first official evacuation flight to the United Kingdom, organized by the United Kingdom government, landed at the Stansted Airport on 18 September 1972. Now, most of them who arrived between September and November 1972 were resettled via the 16 temporary centers set up and administered by the Uganda Resettlement Board. Now, the precise motivation for the expulsion remains unclear. Some of Idi Amin's former supporters suggest that he followed a dream in which he claimed that where Allah had allowed him to expel them, as well as a plot of vengeance against the British government for refusing to provide him with arms to invade Tanzania. Now, Amin defended the expulsion by arguing that he was giving Uganda back to the ethnic Ugandans.
He came himself, not sending a representative. I can't talk with the junior people. I talk with somebody very top because the decision was taken by. That's why he said that my speech is unacceptable. But my speech is acceptable because the explanation which I put there about the transferring of the economy to the citizen, it is there according to the international law. It is a right to any citizen all over the world to control their economy.
What's your reaction to his allegation that the Asians who were expelled were treated in a callous way by you?
They were not treated in a callous way. First of all, I will show you an example. Few days, I think 2 weeks ago, an Asian, a girl got married to a captain in the Air Force. Is that colored? She's completely white like you. And she got married to a black captain in the Air Force. But therefore, the Asians who left Uganda, they left very happily, and even they praised me. They thanked me for allowing them to go back to their country of origin in Britain.
In order to make it absolutely clear to you, I have been honored by the highest order of the conqueror of the British imperialism in Uganda. Government of the British, which made Ugandan slaves over 100 years, have run away. Therefore, they consider me the conqueror of the British Empire.
The government's action in expelling Ugandan Asians and confiscating their assets without clear and unequivocal assurances of full and prompt compensation illustrates the degradation to which intolerance can bring its...
Arising from the agitation of the United Kingdom government in this session on this matter, lodging complaints, some of which were founded on facts gathered from newspapers, my president has communicated by letter to the Secretary General the position of the Uganda government on the most sensitive allegations made against us before this assembly and at the bar of world opinion. My president has given the following specific assurances, which were never really in doubt on our side, but which were distorted by biased, powerful interests. First, all the foreign nationals asked to go are being allowed to take personal belongings as well as reasonable amounts of cash with them, which is to be delimited by our financial resources. Second, there has never been, contrary to astounding allegations of the British Secretary of State, confiscation of any property belonging to any of the departing aliens. All those who have property in Uganda have been asked to make an inventory of such property on forms provided by our Ministry of Commerce, and on the basis of which such property will be sold and the proceeds credited to the accounts of the owners of the property.
Now, Amin framed the expulsion as a way to return Uganda to its people. claiming that he was freeing Uganda from the foreign influence. And he himself declared, and I quote, that we are determined to make the ordinary Ugandan the master of his own destiny, and above all, we will see that he enjoys the wealth of his country. Our deliberate policy is to transfer the economic control of Uganda into the hands of the Ugandans for the first time in our country's history. Now, the expulsion of the Asians wasn't just a sudden decree. It was part of a larger operation aimed at redistributing wealth and property, officially dubbed as Operation Mafuta Mingi. In this campaign, led to widespread chaos and suffering. Now, the Ugandan soldiers, emboldened by the government's orders, engaged in rampant theft, physical assault, and even sexual violence against the Indian population. Now, as if the atmosphere of fear wasn't enough, Idi Amin imposed strict restrictions on the sale and transfer of businesses owned by the Ugandan Indians. So on August 16th, he made a chilling announcement. After the Indian-owned businesses were dismantled, European-owned enterprises would go on to be next. Now, this not only intensified the threat facing the Indian communities, but also foreshadowed the larger implications for all non-Africans in Uganda. Now, the rhetoric of liberation and economic control quickly gave way for unsettling reality, one marked by violence and oppression. Now, as the operation unfolded, many lives would be irrevocably altered, and what would happen to the very fabric of the Uganda's economy? Now, Idi Amin's expulsion of the Indian communities sparked immediately global backlash. The Indian government issued a stern warning of dire consequences, yet Idi Amin's regime remained unyielding, ignoring the ultimatum entirely. Now, initially, India had tried to maintain diplomatic relations, but as the situation escalated, those ties were severed. Now, the United Kingdom government responded by freezing a $10.4 million loan, which was a significant financial blow to Idi Amin's government. But however, Idi Amin brushed this aside. Now, journalists Tony Avegan and Martha Honey described the expulsion as the most explicitly racist policy ever adopted in Black Africa. Now, many of those targeted were not just residents, they were citizens of the United Kingdom and their colonies, further complicating the international response. Now, as the crisis deepened, a staggering 27,200 refugees found their way to the United Kingdom, initially housed in empty military camps. Others scattered across the globe. 6,000 went to Canada, 4,500 to India, and 2,500 to Kenya, while smaller numbers sought refuge in countries like Australia, Norway, and even the Falkland Islands. Now, remarkably, 20,000 refugees went unaccounted for, lost in the chaos of displacement. Now, meanwhile, neighboring countries like Kenya and Tanzania closed the borders, unwilling to face the blood of the refugees. Now, what would become of these displaced individuals, and how would the mass exodus reshape the countries involved? Now, a military committee was tasked with overseeing the reallocation of the confiscated property, but Amin himself was known to personally redirect the valuable assets to his personal possession. So in total, approximately 5,655 farms, ranches, and agricultural estates were seized, along with cars, homes, and other personal belongings. This was not just an economic shift, it was a calculated maneuver to shape Uganda's political dynamics. Of the reallocated properties, a staggering 5,443 went to individuals, while other 176 were granted to government bodies. Now, 63 to semi-state organizations and a mere 2 to charity. Now, one of the biggest beneficiaries of this upheaval was the state-owned Uganda Development Corporation, which gained control of some of the largest enterprises. However, the rapid expansion came at a cost. Now, the sudden influx of the new asset was met with a lack of experienced technicians and managers, leading to a major restructuring of the sector by 1945 to 1975. Now, while some of the confiscated properties ended up in the hands of the Ugandan traditional businessmen, now the overwhelming majority of the people who benefited were soldiers and government officials who are loyal to Idi Amin. So by the time his regime crumbled in 1979, it was rumored that fewer than 50 Indians remained in Uganda, a haunting testament to the fallout of Idi Amin's policies. So if you found this video informative and captivating, don't forget to give it a like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. This has been Regan for Uganda in History, and see you in another video.